Well, he was a very keen stalker and an even keener angler. And every summer in the 1920s, he and his family would go and stay with friends in the Highlands and stalk and fish. And while he was up there in the 1920s, he heard, well, I think this is what happened, he heard the story of an extraordinary man called Captain James Brander Dunbar, the Laird of Pitgaveney, who had, in 1897, he was a larger-than-life army officer, this guy, and he had wagered that he could take a deer off in a deer forest and take it off without being caught. And Lord Abinger took up, who was renting the Inverlochy deer forest, he took up the wager, and Dunbar succeeded, and he framed the check, and he hung he stuck the stag's head on his wall, and John Buchan must have heard about this story, and so it got him going, thinking, while he was in the Highlands, thinking of the plot for this novel.
Is there any indication that John Buchan met Dunbar and talked about it?
He did. I think he thought that he was dead, but actually he wasn't. And after John Macnab was published in 1925, the Laird got in touch with my grandfather and sent him a photograph, both of the stag's head and also the cheque, which is written out to James Brander Dunbar, poacher. So he never cashed it. And JB sent, we all call him JB, everybody's always called him JB, sent the Laird a signed first edition of the book with a handsome apology for taking his story.
Well, I think that's a marvellous result. Now, can you give me an outline of the story? Because the word Macnab is used in vain in all kinds of ways now, but what was the original story?
The original story is about three successful men. One's a cabinet minister, one's been an attorney general, one's a banker, and they all find that they're really bored with their comfortable, rich lives, and they want to get back the savour of life, really. And so they get together one day and they decide to send out a challenge to three adjacent Highland estates and say that they will poach either a stag or a salmon within a certain couple of days. And so they all go up to the Highlands and they get together with a very assorted group of people to help them, and they succeed. Well, one gets caught, one stag though stalked, the chap's caught, and with the other two they succeed. And in particular, fishing for salmon is really, really difficult. And so that was the original story. But thanks to the field, really, they developed the idea of the Macnab challenge in the 1990s, 1997, 98. And now you can, the idea is that in a 24-hour period, I think the straight Macnab is a stag, a brace of grouse and a salmon. But you can also do a Muck Caribbean and a Muck South African and a Muck, all sorts of things. Where there's different game. I don't know what all the Macnabs are, but that's the standard Macnab. And as far as I know, it's been going since 1998.
Well, on the Fieldsports Channel, we developed the Ferrari Macnab when Ferrari lent us a shooting break, and we took a stag in Cornwall and a grouse in Yorkshire, and then caught a salmon on Thursday.
And you succeeded, did
absolutely,
you?
that was a success.
In 24 hours?
Not quite 24 hours, that one. However, in 24 hours we did do an Irish Macnab. So the salmon was relatively easy on the River Mourne, which is a low water river in a Barons Court County Tyrone.
Yeah.
The stag was going to be difficult. The grouse was really hard. There were only about one grouse in the whole of Donegal, and we found it. So we got the grouse, and then about 30 seconds before it got too dark to shoot, a stag stepped out, and we got the stag as well. So that was a tremendous success.
So you are a successful Macnabber then?
Well, I'm not personally, but I was filming the guy who was, and it was terrific. He was the saxophone player from Simply Red.
Oh, right.
Chris DeMargery, he did it.
Yes.
Now, the book ends, I always felt the ending of the book is slightly peculiar, because there's a moment where I can't remember if it's all the estate owners, or at least one of the estate owners is interviewing these three miscreants who include the Attorney General,
Yeah.
And they're saying, they're kind of at a loss to say, why did you do this? If you just asked, we'd have invited you to stay. What? And it kind of ends in an almost uncomfortable way.
Yeah, well, I think the whole idea was that they could actually lose their reputations doing this, because it was, sort of borderline criminal. And I think at the end, what these landowners were saying is, we'd have invited you, why did you have to do it? And of course the reason they had to do it was because they did put their reputations on the line. And that was why it was a big deal for them. And just sending a request to kill a stag is hardly the same, is it?
Does family law relate that JB, that John Buchan, was in any way like any of these characters? Is this the kind of thing he himself would have done, possibly?
No, he wouldn't have poached, but he is quite like the lawyer, the ex-Attorney General. He was a barrister to start off with. What you have to realise about John Buchan is that he was a great many things, not just a writer of comedy adventure novels or thrillers or spy thrillers. He was all sorts of other things as well, and one of the things he was a barrister for a time when he was young, but he was also a colonial administrator. He was head of propaganda during the First World War. He was a Conservative MP. He ended up, and the reason why he was given a peerage, he ended up as Governor General of Canada, and his relationship with Roosevelt was extremely close. And I found out so much about him when I was doing the biography. I hadn't realised what an important figure he was in the world of public affairs. Nothing to do with these 100 books he wrote of fiction and non-fiction.
He was, a giant of the Edwardian literary scene. But then what happened, which I've always found fascinating, we talked a little bit about this before, and you're claiming you're not an expert, but I'm just going to put
really not.
I'm going to put this theory in front of you. So in 1899, 1900, the Daily Mail, Daily Express launched. There had never been a popular hero, with the exception of Robin Hood, who wasn't a king or a general. And then suddenly, from 1900, you get these authors like Dawnford Yeats, so you have, and Sapper, so you have Bulldog Drummond, you have Biggles, the Scarlet Pimpernels, written in 1905, published in 1905. You have all these people who are just fairly ordinary. Richard Hannay, who's your grandfather's character, and they come out of the woodwork, and some of them go on to be picked up by the developing film world in Hollywood. And then there's a kind of crash in interest after the Second World War, and we see the rise of a different literary scene. We see things like the Bloomsbury Group and the importance of merchant ivory in A Room with a View, and then suddenly we're back again with James Bond and Lara Croft. I mean, is that a fair characterisation of what happened?
Well, yeah, I think it probably is. I don't think you really want to put Buchan in the same category as Dawnford Yeats and Bulldog Drummond, actually, the sort of what they call the snobbery with violence. There's very little violence in John Buchan, actually. But I think what happened after the Second World War is that people thought it was all rather old-fashioned. And the kind of spy thrillers that were really influenced by John Buchan. And they admitted, the writers like John le Carré and Graham Greene and Ian Fleming, they all admitted that they were influenced by John Buchan. But they were writing for a different world, really, after the Second World War. It's much less gentlemanly. I mean, you read Ian Fleming, it's not gentlemanly at all, really, is it? And le Carré is much more disillusioned. And I think they may have been influenced by the Bloomsbury Group, actually. This disillusionment you get after the First World War, and even more after the Second, as a result of things having gone so terribly badly wrong. I mean, the thing about John Buchan is he's a fantastically optimistic writer, and it's one of the reasons why John Macnab is still in print, and the 39 Steps is still in print, and Green Mantle, is because, they are essentially optimistic stories. Awful things happen, but you sort of feel that it's all going to be all right in the end. And I'm not sure you feel that about George Smiley or James Bond even, really.
No, James Bond is a tragedy waiting to happen. I mean, he's going to have to die at the end of the series eventually, isn't he?
Yes, yeah.
And my favourite character in John Macnab, by a long way, is Fish Benji.
Oh, Fish Benji, yes. Well, actually, he's based on a true, on a small boy. One of the places that John Buchan used to go stalking was in Sutherland, on the estate rented by a chap called General Stronach, I think. And one year when he was stalking there, he came across this itinerant fish seller, and he put him straight into John Macnab. And Fish Benji is hugely important because he's quite the cleverest of the lot.
He's a wonderful little capitalist amongst these sort of rather kind of soi-disant men from London, and there he is, trying to earn a bob off almost every turn of the plot.
Absolutely, and he doesn't have scruples. He can't afford to have scruples. But I mean, there's also Hunting Tower. I don't know if you've read that. Well, the famous Gorbals diehards. When John Buchan was growing up, his father was the Free Kirk minister in the Gorbals in Glasgow, and it was, as you can imagine, an incredibly tough area. And John Buchan used to run a Sunday school of these, poor, rough boys, some of whom were pretty well homeless. And he never forgot that. And he turned them into fiction, and as I say, in the Gorbals diehards, who are in Hunting Tower, and a couple of others. But also, he just sort of understood these small, rather lost boys, and I think it's rather attractive that he could see the humanity and actually even the greatness in them.
Well, I think Conan Doyle picked that up as well, who was operating at exactly the same time. And most people think of Sherlock Holmes as a 19th century character, but actually most of Sherlock Holmes was right up until the 1920s.
That's
and
right.
he had his, what were they called, the Baker Street, can't remember the name, Undesirables or something like that.
Something like that,
Yes.
yes.
And that was a similar idea of dispossessed people.
Yeah.
And you'd never seen that in literature before. I mean, possibly in Dickens, but you'd never seen that kind of people as heroes, ordinary people as heroes.
Yeah, I think that's right, and that's one of the reasons why people still read John Buchan, is because he had this humanity, this capacity to understand ordinary people when he was completely extraordinary himself.